Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. And this is going to be a very, very interesting but factual discussion about COVID-19. And I'm going to present links down below this video where you can go and see CDC web pages which will confirm exactly what I'm saying. And I'm doing this because I've got a lengthy clip about Donald Trump and his health and how he's been treated, etc., etc. And there's just one thing I'd like to draw to your attention. It's the scaremongering by the mainstream media. And this will become self-apparent as we go through this. Let's start off with the issue of the mask. Okay, now in the main video that's attached here, you will see they're saying, oh no, you got to wear the mask, you got to wear the mask, you got to wear the mask. Well, I'm going to play you first a little video clip where a dad is in a shopping center and the son says, Dad, why aren't you wearing your mask? He says, well, I got a lucky rock. Well, guess what? I agree with him. I've got a lucky stone. And I also have a lucky coin. Okay, you're probably saying right now, what the heck is this all about? Well, let me tell you. The experts say that the only time you should wear a mask is when you are showing symptoms of the virus, because that stops the aerosol spray from going out and infecting other people. If you're feeling healthy, they're saying the worst thing you can do is to wear a mask. Now, let me show you the stone little clip first, and we'll get to the other video.
Hey, Dad.
What?
You're supposed to be wearing your mask.
No, I don't have to wear my mask. Look, I got my special rock.
And what's that gonna do?
Same thing your mask does. Fuck all.
Okay, as I said, I've got my lucky little stone as well. It's also got a little special case for itself. That's another story. But now I'm going to show you a video clip which wasn't produced by some little alternative social media website like Loving Life. It was produced by Australia's largest television channel, Channel 9. And it went live just a couple of days ago, and it says, The Truth Unmasked. Okay, so let's have a look at that first.
Healthy people are being warned against using face masks to protect themselves against the virus. As Justine Conway explains, experts fear incorrect use could lead to more infection.
It's becoming commonplace. On the streets and in supermarkets, people are increasingly wearing face masks, just as a precaution.
Wearing masks like that is wasting a mask. That's a mask that won't be available when it's actually needed.
The state government's advice on wearing face masks is in line with the World Health Organization. Under its guidelines, masks should only be worn if you have a cough, fever and difficulty breathing, or if you are healthy and taking care of someone with these symptoms, and or someone with a confirmed case of COVID-19.
If you do not have these symptoms, you do not have to wear masks, because there is no evidence that they protect people who are not sick.
If you must wear one, a regular surgical mask is best. They're intended for single use only. Masks with respirators, also known as N95 surgical masks, should be reserved for healthcare workers. Nationwide, there's a shortage, and only one manufacturing plant in Australia makes them. This is Medcon in Shepparton. It's gone from producing 2 million masks a year to almost 2 million a week, exclusively for those frontline workers. When you look at some of the masks people are wearing, you can see there is a huge range of products out there. And while they may offer some sense of security, experts warn if you wear a mask the wrong way, it could actually make you sick.
When I've been walking about, I've been seeing people touching the front of the masks, adjusting the masks on their face, and then going and touching other things. What we've got to remember is that front of the mask may be picking up different pathogens.
And the same goes for gloves.
What they also will stop is you actually washing your hands.
Justine Conway, 9 News.
Okay, the next bit of information I want to give you, I will link the website directly below this video in the description. And it's from the Johns Hopkins Hospital, highly regarded medical center in the US. And they say under the heading coronavirus versus flu deaths, they say COVID-19, there have been approximately 1,023,708 deaths reported worldwide. In the US, 207,816 people have died of COVID-19 between January 2020 and the 2nd of October 2020, which was yesterday. Flu. The World Health Organization estimates. Now this is an estimate. This isn't with all this testing that's been done for the coronavirus. The World Health Organization estimates that 290,000 to 650,000 people die of the flu-related causes every year worldwide. Okay, so if we take the maximum figure of 650,000 for the flu, and we take into account two little charts that I'm going to show you in a second. We take into account that with the COVID-19, a lot of people who've had a tremendous amount of people over their 65s who've had comorbidities. They've got a poor heart, or they've got problems with their breathing, or they've got cancer, or they've got whatever it might be. They have been put down as a result of COVID-19 deaths. You can see now that the playing field is starting to level. That the COVID-19 is rather like just another type of flu. And the killer punch with this argument is, what happened to the flu in the Southern Hemisphere this year? It didn't appear. Because COVID-19, as far as I'm concerned, this is my perspective, COVID-19 is nothing more than another variety of the flu, but it's been treated dramatically differently by design. Let's go through those figures again. COVID-19, just over 1 million reported deaths, as I say, which includes comorbidities where people were very sick anyway. So if you take the flu situation, they wouldn't have been noted as being a result of the flu. And I'll tell you why. The World Health Organization estimates that between 290,000 to 650,000 people die of flu-related causes every year worldwide. Why do they say estimate? Because there's no testing. It's just another form of death. You can see what I'm starting to talk about now. There's something very weird going on here. Now, let me show you a chart. And this is from the CDC's own website. And I will link this page down below in the description. And you will see that the actual estimated number of deaths in America is only blown out during a couple of months earlier this year, which is obviously when COVID-19 was there. I'm not saying COVID-19 doesn't cause deaths, but what I'm saying is that the actual people who've been associated with dying because of COVID-19 is a load of crap. And you can look at this chart and see for yourself. It's probably about 50 to 60,000 people in America that have died above the anticipated level. But if you look at last year before COVID-19 came out, there were thousands and thousands of people who during the same flu season pushed up through the estimated deaths. So let's have a look at that. And just to add a little bit of weight behind what I was saying there, or suggesting, I'm going to show you the CDC, or the Center for Disease Control in America's own figures, updated infection fatality survival rate for COVID-19. 0 to 19 age group, survival rate 99.997%. 20 to 49, survival rate 99.98%. Age group 50 to 69, survival rate 99.5%. Then we get to 70 plus, where Donald Trump is. Survival rate 94.6%. So in other words, 1 in every 20. You can see how with age you've got other complicating factors, and I've gone through those. So what's happening here is with the elderly, you've got COVID-19, and because of their comorbidity, it was just like the final nail in the coffin. That's been put down as a COVID-19 death, which is bullshit. It's because of the comorbidity. And again, if I come back to that earlier piece where I was saying, hey, flu, you've got about 650,000 deaths a year. COVID-19 has been put up to about 1 million since January. You can start seeing that there is something very strange about how COVID-19 is being treated by the so-called World Health Organization experts. And that's why so many people around the world, including a growing number of medical, highly professional doctors, are saying there's something very strange happening here. You lock down the whole world, destroy the economy, tens of thousands of people commit suicide because they are absolutely blown out of the water because they can't do anything. You got starvation happening worldwide. You got the economies of the world being destroyed over literally, and I'm not going to say a handful, I'm going to say maybe a couple of 100,000 deaths, which are as a result of this flu. That's very, very strange. This is rather like an Agatha Christie story because, okay, the old farts like me will remember Agatha Christie, who was an amazing writer about crime and stuff like that. She has some amazing books, because what we're talking about here is a super spreader, which apparently is behind how Trump caught the coronavirus. And just a few days ago, he announced that Amy Coney Barrett would be put forward as the new judge or justice in the highest court in the land in America. They've just got nine judges at that level who basically make the final decision on things that matter and specifically related to the Constitution, like the Second Amendment, etc., etc., etc. And this will be Trump's third judicial appointment at that level, which is unheard of. But with Trump now having the coronavirus, and with apparently the super spreader being present at the announcement of Amy Coney Barrett in the White House gardens, 4 people who attended that particular announcement have tested positive for the coronavirus. Now, you wonder if this wasn't deliberately set up. I know it's a conspiracy theory, but if you got enough Republicans who test positive for the coronavirus, remember Trump's period only goes up to early November, if that stops the Senate going ahead and ratifying Amy Coney Barrett as that new judge or justice, that's going to have a huge impact if, and God forgive it never happens, Joe Biden gets in as president, because then he will put in one of these libtard judges who will be fighting against the Constitution of the United States. Now, here comes a video where you can get an update on Donald Trump and how they're treating him, because he is in his 70s. Remember, 5% of people in their 70s do die. And again, that's normally because of comorbidities, which Trump does not have. So he probably falls more into the 50 to 69, which is a 99.5% chance of full recovery. And here comes the video. Please remember to subscribe to be kept informed. Ring the bell for the updates. Please like this video. Please share this video. And above all, please stay safe. Bye for now.
COVID in the White House. President Trump and the First Lady in the aftermath of their diagnoses. We have new reporting on the president's course of treatment and the contact tracing efforts now underway. Could the crowded ceremony at the Rose Garden for Amy Coney Barrett have been a super spreader event? At least 4 people, including the president and first lady, have now tested positive after attending it. The presidential race now seemingly frozen in time. Joe Biden on the trail tonight. He and his wife testing negative, but as voters cast their votes, is the campaigning effectively over? Concerns tonight about President Trump's age and overall health putting him at greater risk of the virus. The major constitutional question, what happens if the president is unable to do his job? Right now, he remains in control. Questions over exposure at the debate. We'll talk with someone who was there, sitting 15 feet away from the president, the guest of Joe Biden, who lost her father to COVID earlier this year. We also speak to the president's former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski. And we're tracking major developments in the deadly police shooting of Breonna Taylor. Grand jury recordings now made public. Our nation pressed on all sides tonight. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. An October surprise like no other. The President of the United States and the First Lady have now joined the more than 7 million Americans who've been infected with coronavirus. As a precautionary measure, the President has received an experimental antibody cocktail, and out of an abundance of caution, the President is now being treated at Walter Reed Medical Center, where he's expected to stay for several days of testing. We watched as the President's helicopter Marine One flew over Washington, making its way to the hospital. All this a reminder of just how quickly things can escalate. Just last Saturday, the president introduced his nominee for the Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett. At least 4 people at that event have now tested positive. Earlier this week, he held a rally in Minnesota. And of course, we all saw him at that now infamous debate going head-to-head against former Vice President Joe Biden, who has now tested negative. Yet another dizzying and consequential news day of 2020. We are now facing the most serious health crisis involving a U.S. president since President Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981. Our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl, leads us off with how we got here and what we know now.
A sign of just how serious the president's condition is. He was taken via helicopter late this afternoon to the Walter Reed Medical Center. Multiple sources close to the president say he is experiencing the signature symptoms of COVID-19: fever, chills, nasal congestion, and a cough. The White House released a statement from the president's doctor saying he has been treated with a, quote, polyclonal antibody cocktail, as well as zinc, vitamin D, famotidine, melatonin, and a daily aspirin. As of this afternoon, the doctor wrote, the president remains fatigued but in good spirits. He's being evaluated by a team of experts, and together we'll be making recommendations to the president and first lady in regard to the next steps. Earlier, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows provided few details on the president's condition.
The president does have mild symptoms. He continues to be not only in good spirits, but very energetic.
Remarkably, Meadows, who has been in close contact with the president, addressed reporters without a mask. So did Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, who refused to elaborate on the president's health or how he was tested.
I'm not going to get into the president's symptoms exactly. I'm not going to get in exactly what type of test.
The president himself has gone silent. The last word from him, a tweet shortly before 1 a.m., where he announced that he and the First Lady had tested positive. His public schedule included a phone call today to discuss protecting seniors from coronavirus, but Vice President Pence handled the call instead. Last night, President Trump told Sean Hannity he was waiting on test results after learning one of his very closest aides, Hope Hicks, had tested positive. He implied Hicks had been infected by a member of the military or law enforcement.
You know Hope very well. She's fantastic, and she's done a great job. But it's very, very hard when you are with people from the military or for law enforcement, and they come over to you and they want to hug you and they want to kiss you because we really have done a good job for them. And you get close and things happen. I was surprised to hear with Hope, but she's a very warm person with them, and she knows there's a risk.
Hicks had been at the president's side all week. Tuesday, she was at the debate in Cleveland, where members of the president's family sat in the front row without masks. Wednesday, she traveled to his rally in Duluth, Minnesota. You see her here walking to Marine One without a mask, Jared Kushner right behind her. She touches the handrail, and then so does he. At the rally, President Trump tossed hats to his supporters. And sources tell ABC News Hicks was starting to experience symptoms. On the ride home, she was quarantined on Air Force One. ABC's Jordan Phelps was on that flight and saw Hicks exit through the back.
It was striking because at the time she was wearing a mask. It was striking because Hope Hicks never wears a mask.
Sources tell us Hicks tested positive yesterday morning. The White House won't say when the president found out. Meadows told reporters his team sprang into action just as Trump was heading out to a fundraiser in New Jersey.
In terms of Hope Hicks, we discovered that right as Marine One was taking off yesterday. We actually pulled some of the people that had been traveling in close contact.
But they didn't pull the president off the chopper. He went on to meet with about 100 supporters at his Bedminster resort, even though he knew he'd been in close contact with Hicks. The governor of New Jersey is now urging anyone who was there to take precautions.
We urge everyone who was in and around the Bedminster event or events yesterday to take full precautions, including self-quarantining and ultimately getting tested.
Hours after the fundraiser, the president appeared via a pre-recorded video at New York's traditional Al Smith dinner and declared the COVID crisis all but over.
I just want to say that the end of the pandemic is in sight.
Then just 6 hours later, he tweeted out his own test results. The First Lady and I tested positive for COVID-19. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together. This morning, the First Lady tweeted she was experiencing mild symptoms. The White House doctor said Mrs. Trump has a mild cough and headache. Now the White House is scrambling to track down everyone who's been in contact with the president, the First Lady, and Hope Hicks. It's not an easy task. Over the past several days, the president has held one large-scale event after another with no social distancing and very few people wearing masks. On Saturday, hundreds of supporters jammed into the Rose Garden as he announced his Supreme Court nominee. Utah Senator Mike Lee was there, caught on camera hugging one person after another. Today, Senator Lee announced he had tested positive. Also in the crowd, the president of Notre Dame, Father John Jenkins. He wasn't wearing a mask either, and today he tested positive for COVID too. Tuesday, the president and his entourage traveled to Cleveland for the debate, where he mocked Joe Biden for wearing masks.
Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it. He shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen.
Wednesday, as he headed out to his rally, he shouted answers to reporters' questions. But the president cut that rally short, and sources tell ABC that top aides noticed he appeared exhausted and fatigued. Some figured he was just tired. Others worried he may have been exposed to COVID-19.
Still dancing, though, in that picture. Jonathan Karl joins us now from Walter Reed Medical Center, where the president is now being monitored. What's the latest on the president's condition, and what's the plan for his stay there at Walter Reed?
Well, there's not much in the way of detail about the president's condition. We know that he has some of those classic symptoms of COVID-19, that he has chills, a fever, nasal congestion, a cough. We're told that he will be here for a few days. The White House press secretary says he will be working out of what she calls the presidential offices here at the Walter Reed Medical Center for a few days. Obviously, Lindsay, he wouldn't be here if he didn't need to have access to some of the best medical care in the world.
Right, because we'd imagine also that there would be some of that kind of equipment inside the White House. And John, you've also been reporting on the massive contact tracing effort underway after all of the events that the president has attended in the past week. How much concern is there about just how many people could be affected?
Well, there's a lot of concern. There's a lot of concern in official Washington. I would say that the event that has the most people concerned is the Rose Garden event, where the president announced his choice for a Supreme Court nominee. You saw the event, Lindsay. We made comments of it at the time. A lot of people crowded shoulder to shoulder in the Rose Garden, including a number of Republican senators, a number of cabinet members, and a lot of official Republican Washington all there. And now we have seen Senator Mike Lee, one of the Republican senators there, has tested positive. So has the president of Notre Dame University, where Judge Amy Coney Barrett was a professor. The president has tested positive. He was seen there not wearing a mask. And then, of course, the president went to the fundraiser with about 100 of his top dollar supporters just yesterday in New Jersey at his Bedminster resort. Certainly a lot of contact tracing needing to be done there. there. A lot of people have had contact with the president, and quite a few with Hope Hicks as well.
Jonathan, Carl, I know you've been reporting nonstop for hours. We so appreciate it. The president's diagnosis has significant implications for the race for the White House, of course. The Trump campaign says all previously announced events with the president will be held virtually or postponed. Meanwhile, after testing negative for COVID-19 today, Joe Biden headed to a campaign stop in Grand Rapids, Michigan, offering words of support for the president and First Lady. So just how will the president's diagnosis change the campaign? Here's ABC's Mary Bruce.
With the news breaking shortly before 1 a.m. that the president and the First Lady tested positive for coronavirus, there was immediate concern for the 77-year-old Joe Biden, whether or not he might have been infected too, after spending more than 90 minutes on that debate stage in Cleveland with the president. Biden Tuesday taking Trump to task over his handling of the pandemic.
He's been totally irresponsible the way in which he has handled the social distancing and people wearing masks, basically encouraged them not to. All right. He's a fool on this.
The podiums socially distanced over 13 feet apart, but no masks. The president often shouting over Biden.
The question is, radical left.
Will you shut up, man?
In the audience that night, Jill Biden, her face covered, a sharp contrast to those images of Trump's family and members of his inner circle violating the rules of the Cleveland Clinic, which hosted the debate. When this healthcare worker tried to give them masks, they refused. It wasn't until mid-morning that we learned the former vice president was being tested, the country then waiting several hours for the results to come in. Just after noon, Biden tweeting, "I'm happy to report that Jill and I have tested negative for COVID. Thank you to everyone for your messages of concern." Biden taking 2 tests, both negative, before getting back on the trail. On the ground in Michigan, wishing the First family well.
My wife Jill and I prayed that they'll make a quick and full recovery. This is not a matter of politics. It's a bracing reminder to all of us that we have to take this virus seriously.
With his mask on for the entire speech, Biden imploring Americans to wear them too.
So be patriotic. It's not about being a tough guy. It's about doing your part. Wearing a mask is not only going to protect you, but it also protects those around you.
Those masks ever increasingly important. Mary Bruce joins us now. Of course, this all just completely upends the campaign. What's the Biden campaign saying about how they plan to adapt? And could those future debates, including the planned VP debate on Wednesday, be impacted?
Yeah, those debates right now are such a key question. We have 2 more presidential debates, and right now it is hard to see how they're going to go ahead as scheduled. The next face-off between Joe Biden and President Trump is set for just 2 weeks from now on October 15th. And of course, the vice presidential debate is set for next Wednesday. And even though Mike Pence has tested negative, there are questions about whether he needs to be isolating and whether they can continue to go ahead with that as well. On the bigger picture here, look, the Biden campaign appears to still be full steam ahead. They have not canceled any of their planned events, but the former vice president is changing his message. We've seen today his campaign pull down their negative ads in a bit of an overture to the president as he goes through this horrific experience, and he is tempering his sharp attacks against the president. We didn't hear any of those during Biden's campaign event earlier today. Instead, the former vice president calling for unity, saying this is a time for the country to come together. Lindsay.
And Mary, of course, Biden went forward with that Michigan event today after his negative test. But is there any sense that the campaign is concerned that he could still be at risk for testing positive after that time on the debate stage with the president?
Yeah, there were very serious questions today when we learned that Joe Biden was going ahead and getting back out on the campaign trail, given the fact that just a few days ago he spent 90 minutes just 13 feet apart from the president on that debate stage, not wearing masks, of course, throughout the debate. But Biden's team says they felt comfortable with him getting back out on the road for really 3 main reasons. One being that he's tested negative. We know he had those 2 negative tests. 2, that he didn't come into close contact with the president. There was some question about whether they crossed paths behind the stage at the debate. It seems that did not happen. And 3, they say that the vice president and his campaign follow all of the safety precautions. You saw him today wearing that mask throughout his entire remarks. They have always followed the guidance very strictly. I can tell you, having been at many of his campaign events now, they take these things very seriously. They're going to continue to do that. They say all of that combined gives them enough confidence to be back out there on the campaign trail.
But in the past, and I know that you've been there many times, when he would start speaking at the podium, he would take his mask off, which was a difference from what we saw today, right?
it is a bit of a difference. Now, it has depended on where he is. When he's in a very controlled setting, like some of those press conferences that I have attended, we all are 6 feet apart in a setting that the campaign is really controlling. He usually takes his mask off once he gets to the podium. He does that sometimes on the road. You have seen other times on the trail he keeps his mask on completely. I think today was probably mostly about sending a message as he was hammering home his point that those masks can save lives, and as he calls them, a patriotic part of every American's duty.
Mary Bruce, thanks so much as always. And switching gears now, let's bring in Trump campaign senior advisor Corey Lewandowski. First off, let's just say our thoughts are with the First Family, Hope Hicks, and all those in the White House who have been impacted. Have you gotten a chance to speak with the president today? And what's the latest that you can tell us about the president's condition as he arrived at Walter Reed?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I have not spoken to the president today. I know that he and the First Lady have been in close consultation with their doctors and their other family members. Obviously, the decision was made sometime this afternoon to move the president to Walter Reed Medical Facility so he can have the 24-hour care that would be expected at a facility like that. They're clearly much more capable of providing any kind of maintenance or care that would be required for the president in that type of facility as opposed to staying in the White House. And knowing the president the way that I do, I am certain that he was hesitant and wanted to stay at the White House, wanted to keep doing his day job. But I think as an abundance of caution, the president acquiesced and decided to go up to Walter Reed today.
I know it's still early since this diagnosis, but how concerned should the American public be about the president's health and how this could impact his ability to do the job?
Well, we know the president to be a fighter. He's a fighter at everything he does. And for the almost 8 years now that I've known the president, I've never known him to spend one day inside of a hospital other than a routine checkup, which the American people have always had the opportunity since he's been the president to see the medications he's on and see the full litany of tests and battery that he has gone through. So I've never known the president to have a sick day or a down day since I've known him. And so this is outside the ordinary for him. And I'm sure he didn't want to do it, but he understands the severity of the COVID crisis and the pandemic that's encircling the globe and what it's doing to he and the First Lady. And therefore, under the advice of his doctor, he went over to the Walter Reed.
And right, yeah, his oldest son also saying today that he had never seen his father sick. But this, of course, will have a major impact on how the president campaigns in the weeks ahead. With just 32 days left until Election Day, do you anticipate him being able to campaign in person at all again? And do you see these remaining presidential debates happening?
Well, it's a great question. And look, the number one priority is obviously the health and security of the First Family. And so because of that, I don't know exactly. I'm not a physician. I don't know what the diagnosis is or how long it takes to recover. But I know this president to be a fighter. I would envision that he'll be back on the campaign trail. Prior to this, last week, he was doing 3 and 4 rallies a day. He was supposed to be in Florida tonight and then 2 rallies tomorrow in Wisconsin. Those have obviously been postponed. Our media campaign has postponed all of our activities where the president was supposed to be. So we're going to make sure that he gets better first. I believe the debates are going to continue. We've got a debate scheduled with the vice president next and Kamala Harris. That right now is planned to go forward as scheduled. And then 2 more additional presidential debates, which will take place at the end of this month so the American people can see the differences between this president and Joe Biden.
As you well know, the president has been criticized for holding large in-person rallies with mostly maskless supporters packed together. I know you've said before that you support people wearing masks, but it shouldn't be mandated and that masks are given out to all rally attendees. But would you say, in your estimation, that it could have had a huge impact on public health and encouraging mask use if the president had just looked out at the sea of people and said, hey, would everybody put a mask on?
I don't know. I mean, look, the real question is at what point do you have personal responsibility and at what point do you have a government that tells people what to do every day? And, there has to be a level of personal responsibility. In my home state of New Hampshire, we don't have a seatbelt law if you're over 18 years old. That's not to say I don't wear my seatbelt, but it should be up to the individual to decide if you want to be safe in your vehicle. And while I choose to wear my seatbelt every day, I know it's a right that I have because my government hasn't mandated it. So, we hand out masks at every rally. We provide hand sanitizer. All of our literature, as we're asking people to come to these outdoor rallies, tell people that they must wear their masks. The PA announcers at the rallies before the president arrives says that masks are mandated. And if somebody chooses to take off their mask, I don't know what we can do other than tell them that it's a requirement. So look, there is a level of personal responsibility. And as you look at the number of protocols and precautions that were put in place for people who work in the White House so that this very incident didn't happen, clearly either there was a shortfall somewhere or the protocols were breached. And I don't think they were breached, but it just goes to show how deadly this virus or dangerous this virus can be, that even with all those protocols in place, the president and the first lady still contracted it.
But as you know, you can count on one hand the number of times the president has been seen at least publicly wearing a mask, and he's regularly mocked Joe Biden for wearing one, including on the debate stage on Tuesday. You are an advisor. You have the president's ear. Would you suggest to him that he perhaps should change his behavior and his message on wearing a mask? And even if individuals are testing negative, do those working on the campaign and in the White House need to regularly wear masks rather than simply making it optional?
You know, people should wear masks if they feel that it's important to them. And look, here's the thing. When you go to the White House, the procedures are very clear after you've come through the security checkpoints. You go directly down to where the physicians are. You subject yourself to a nasal swab. You then await those results before you're even allowed to leave that general vicinity. And, you know, most people feel fairly confident in the results that they're getting from those doctors. And so I understand that maybe in some instances there's been a lax of wearing masks on the White House campus after every person has been tested. But I can tell you, I was at an event on Wednesday night with the president where every person was COVID tested before being allowed into the building. We practiced social distancing. There was rope and stanchion. The president didn't get within 8 feet of anybody who was at that event. Even those who were scheduled for pictures had to stand 8 feet from the president. There was no handshaking. There was no close proximity. And so those protocols have been in place in the past as it relates to this president. And honestly, you know, as you see there, and it's an opportunity to maybe get relatively close to the president, people want to have their picture taken with the president. And if they were just tested negative for COVID-19, I think they felt pretty good that they didn't have to have that mask on. I think we have to relook at those protocols and decide what we need to do moving forward.
And you just mentioned that you've spent some time with the president in the past week, including on Wednesday, as you said. You've also tested negative in your visits to the White House. So have you been tested today? Are you planning to self-quarantine, given that you have had this recent contact with the president?
I did test this afternoon. I went up to my local facility and I tested. I had a 15-minute rapid test, the Abbott test. It came back negative. But also, in addition to that, out of an abundance of caution, I took the larger nasal swab test, which is off and takes about 2 days to come back. But I've already been tested today and tested negative.
Corey Lewandowski, stay healthy. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
To say it will be difficult to contact trace the president's point of exposure is certainly an understatement. We first got an inkling of the potential risk to the president when we found out that Hope Hicks, his close aide, tested positive last night, but that does not mean that she gave it to him. We have seen him attending massive rallies as recently as this event in Minnesota. And as you heard earlier, we know of several people who attended Amy Coney Barrett's event at the White House last Saturday who have since become infected, including the president of Notre Dame University. Not to mention that fundraiser in Bedminster, New Jersey. We can see the testing taking place here ahead of that event. So let's bring in Rachel Scott, who covers the president for us and is at Walter Reed Hospital. First, Rachel, what's the situation right now on the ground?
Yeah, well, earlier today we saw crowds of people gathering at the fences of the Walter Reed Medical Center just behind me as the president touched down. Some still lingering here today. The president is now inside. He's expected to stay here for the next few days, but we are told that the president will still be working. He'll be having some presidential offices set up inside for him, and he spent much of the day in self-isolation also working, though he is experiencing those mild symptoms. The White House press secretary says that he is in good spirits here tonight, but he is expected to receive several tests over the next couple of days here at Walter Reed. Lindsay.
And Rachel, paint a picture for us of the protocols and the procedures employed at the White House to help reduce the risk of COVID.
You know, it is very interesting, Lindsay. I have been in the White House lots of times through the course of this pandemic, and I can count on one hand the amount of times I have seen a White House staffer wear a face mask prior to today from some of the images that are coming out. The White House is a very close quarters, especially in the West Wing. And so initially, when we saw the president's personal valet test positive, when we saw the vice president's press secretary at the time, now communications director, inspector test positive, we saw them kind of amp up security protocols there. You had the temperature checks outside before you got in. Now we do know that, of course, everyone that is in immediate contact with the president is tested, but there are no mask mandates inside of the West Wing. It's a very tight corridor. It's hard to social distance there. And even Chris Christie, who was in that debate prep with the president just a few days ago, said no one in the room was wearing a mask at the time, Lindsay.
And earlier today, Chris Christie told our George Stephanopoulos that as of 5:30 p.m., he still had yet to be contacted by the White House, even though he was in the very same room as the president and Hope Hicks. What do we know about what kind, if any, contact tracing is taking place?
Well, I think this is exactly what is causing so much anxiety among White House staffers and so much fear, quite frankly, because so much is still unknown. The Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, today said he expects more people in the administration to test positive over the next few days. He says more people may have been exposed to the virus. And so now all eyes are to see exactly who does end up testing positive, what staffers. We know we have seen some of the ripple effects so far, but so much remains to be unseen, and especially tonight. I mean, what a stunning 24 hours. The president, less than 24 hours after announcing that he has tested positive for COVID-19, experiencing those symptoms, and then now spending a few days in one of the top hospitals here in the nation.
And Rachel, has the posture at the White House changed at all? I mean, we saw people like the White House press secretary and the chief of staff without masks today, but did that change then later on?
Yeah, you know, I think today as the president was leaving and departing on Marine One, we saw several White House staffers wearing a face mask. Again, that is something that has been rare over my experience in the last several months covering the White House, being inside of the West Wing in the lower press area. It's a rare sighting for me to see. But the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, as he was saying that he expects more people to test positive, he actually wasn't wearing a mask himself. And of course, this spills over into the campaign as well. I'm sure you were showing those images of the president's rallies where people are packed together, many people not wearing a mask. There is no mask mandate at those. Social distancing is not enforced. And in fact, every single supporter that enters one of those arenas or airport hangars has to sign away their liability that if they get sick, they will not sue the president or the campaign, Lindsay.
Rachel Scott, thank you so much. And joining us now to talk more about the science behind it all is epidemiologist and ABC News medical contributor, Dr. John Brownstein. Doctor, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Lindsay.
So the president, of course, is now still in the very early stages of COVID-19, said to be experiencing mild symptoms. Give us some perspective on what could be considered, quote, mild symptoms, and tell us about what typically happens during those first few early days of the disease. How does the president's overall health picture also factor in?
Right. Well, clearly this has been quite a day because we heard about the mild symptoms early in the day, and we have thought maybe there was a probability of a hospitalization. We know about 20% of the cases end up in a hospitalization. Well, already now we have the president at Walter Reed. So that in itself is a concern. Now, clearly we have to understand that every individual is different, and we have very limited information about the president right now. But we do have concerns because of his age. We know that men have a higher risk of complications, and we also know about underlying conditions, right? Obesity, high blood pressure. All of this combined makes for a really high-risk individual. Now, of course, he's getting incredible care, and we see great outcomes from here. But we're going to be watching for, fever, shortness of breath, the need for oxygen, and clearly the real risk we have is whether this translates to an ICU visit, because from there, there's real risk beyond that of severe complications. So that's, the next 10 days are going to be incredibly complicated that we'll have to be looking at closely to see how he does.
And Vice President Mike Pence's office released a statement saying that he tested negative and is not considered a close contact with any individuals who have tested positive for COVID, including the president. We know that they met together just as recently as Tuesday. Scientifically, does that sound right?
The timeline doesn't really add up here, because if you test positive, then as an epidemiologist, you want to look 48 hours to look at the contacts that you had. And clearly the president and the vice president had prolonged contact, without mask wearing, without social distancing. And from that perspective, and according to the CDC guidelines, from that moment, that vice president needs to be in quarantine. We also have to remember that these tests, are not perfect. They can generate false negatives. And regardless of the outcome of the test, we also know that there's a long incubation period of the virus. So it could take some days before he tests positive. So from here, he really needs to be in a quarantine phase for at least 2 weeks.
And similarly, the Bidens, they have, of course, tested negative as well. But what kind of reassurance do they have? And when would you recommend that they get tested again? And for anybody out there who thinks that they may have been exposed, remind us again of the proper protocol.
Yeah, this is reassuring that he tested negative, and clearly that gives us some positive feedback. But, actually, again, we have this incubation period that can last, up to 2 weeks. Now, it's usually about 3 to 5 days. The debates were Tuesday. He's likely not fully out of the woods, right? Yes, he had 13 feet of distance, but they were shouting at each other. There was, prolonged 90-minute contact. That does raise the risk. There's nothing magical about 6 feet. That generally is a good distance. But when you have a long time period and a lot of spreading of your aerosols, that increases your risk. So clearly they need to be really thinking about the campaign in terms of their own quarantines, but also keeping that testing going, because it is very possible he may end up positive in the days ahead.
And we've certainly seen the White House use the rapid test to clear themselves from having to take some of the more typical precautions that they're advising and recommending for all Americans. I was just there last month and can tell you personally, we hardly saw anyone inside wearing masks. They seemed confident in those rapid tests. Would you say that that's the wrong approach, to have so much confidence and rely on those test results?
Yeah, testing is not a singular approach. That's not the way that you get out of this pandemic. Clearly, it's such an important concept, but it's really a part of a layered strategy: mask wearing, social distancing, and then testing, of course. But, the White House isn't a perfect bubble. People are coming in and out. They're having contacts. Clearly, people are not observing mask wearing in the ways in which, public health has really pushed. So from that perspective, even if testing was happening, you could get a false positive. The virus could be incubating and generate negative, but likely that person was eventually going to be infectious. So testing alone really wasn't going to protect the inner circle of the president and his team. So, this is not actually unexpected, unfortunately.
And finally, Doctor, talk to us about the mental aspect of the pandemic. It's already been a long year. Many people are feeling over it. The president has admittedly been playing down the threat of the virus, but there's now hope that this serves as a wake-up call to all Americans, that anybody can get it. As an epidemiologist, what are the changes that you're hoping to see going forward from the American public as cases in many places continue to climb?
Yeah, clearly we are all exhausted at this point, right? We've been trying to push the science of these basic concepts like mask wearing, like social distancing, hand washing, and clearly that hasn't really sort of resonated with a good chunk of the U.S. population, and partly because of the narrative that is coming from the White House. Now, this is a real moment, right? This could be a real change in the narrative. It could be a change in how the White House is communicating about risk. And yes, to the American people, recognizing that our leader is vulnerable to this virus, it may end up changing people's view of this virus. Take it seriously, and for once and for all, really start observing the clear sort of data that we've seen around the ability to intervene with this virus: mask wearing, social distancing, all the things that we've been talking about for so many months.
Such helpful and useful, potentially life-saving information. Dr. John Brownstein, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
While it's still early since the president has been diagnosed, the federal government must be prepared in case the president's condition worsens or if he becomes incapacitated because of the coronavirus. The Constitution's 25th Amendment details an orderly temporary transfer of power. So let's bring in ABC's Terry Moran. Terry, break this down for us, when this could be invoked and how it would work.
Well, Lindsay, this is available to President Trump initially for him to decide. The Constitution specifies if the president believes that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office, he can temporarily assign them to the vice president, Mike Pence, who we should say has tested negative for coronavirus. And he does that simply by writing a letter declaring that to the Speaker of the House and the President pro tempore of the Senate. At that point, Vice President Pence would become acting president. When the president recovers, he'd write another letter saying, I'm better, and the powers flow back to him. The problem is that in a situation like this, when the president is ill with a very serious, potentially serious disease, if he falls ill before he gets a chance to write those letters, then it would be up to Vice President Mike Pence to convene the cabinet. This is under the Constitution, and the cabinet would vote and decide whether or not President Trump can continue discharging those powers and duties. If they say no, then Mike Pence becomes acting president. We should say this has only happened 3 times in our history, and all during elective surgeries. Ronald Reagan during a surgery, George W. Bush during 2 surgeries. They decided voluntarily to make their vice presidents, for very brief periods of time, a few hours, the temporary acting presidents. This is a very different, unprecedented situation.
But interesting to note that Ronald Reagan did not invoke that when he was shot in 1981. And Terry, this diagnosis comes as the Senate is moving fast to try to confirm the president's Supreme Court nominee, Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Will that process at all have to be delayed?
Well, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says no. He wants to keep this nomination on a fast track before the election, and that could be challenging because there are Senator Mike Lee, who's on the Senate Judiciary Committee, has announced he's tested positive. And right now it does look as if this coronavirus is moving through some of the top echelons of the Republican Party. They do need to see contact trace, test, see who might else have had it. And then they have to think about the workers in the Senate building where this hearing would be held, and others, staff who might be exposed as well. I think it would be seen as bad form right now to rush through with it. Wait a few days, see how things are in that contact testing and tracing, and maybe move forward then. But they are determined to get her on the court as soon as possible.
Terry Moran, thank you so much. And when we come back, our look at how other global leaders who have battled COVID beat the virus. The president's approach to COVID has long been documented. We'll look at his evolution on the virus.